Yes, I think the first thing to say is that technology is always developing. There's always going to be something new that's coming out. And when we look at the various surveys that we carry out in our conversations with people, we've noticed there are three technology trends that are really shaping FP&A for this coming year. The first one that we're going to look at is actually in the area of predictive and prescriptive analytics. Now, we've always been able to analyze data. And I got involved in the whole area back in the 1970s, so it's a long time ago. So we've always been able to analyze data, but what's different is there's so much data available today, so much data, that it's traditional methods of analysis no longer work. And so one of the trends we're seeing is that organizations are starting to move towards artificial intelligence, and in particular with machine learning. Now, these are buzzwords that you've probably heard, but let's just look a bit deeper at what it is. From an FP&A point of view, there are two categories of machine learning that are of interest. The first one is what we call supervised learning, and this is where you present a whole stack of data to the algorithms. And this data, you say to the algorithms, we think that, for example, sales is connected with price, is connected with market size, and so on. So you present this data, and the algorithms are able to work through this and work out what the relationships are, things like trends and what the correlations are, and so on, and then able to predict that. So these algorithms work from training data, and then they can make predictions about the future. The second set of algorithms are what we call unsupervised learning. And this is where we present data to the algorithms, but we actually don't know what's related. And so the system is then able to say, well, did you know? And then it'll go through and say, that some cells in some areas is actually related to the weather or what other information you give it. And the way that we're seeing people are using this, they actually use both sets. So, for example, an organization will start off by looking at their cells and finding what are the correlations, but then they'll present a whole load of other data. And it actually helps to then uncover what we call hidden drivers of performance. Now, if we look at our last survey, about 10% of organizations that we interviewed were starting to use these algorithms. However, what's interesting is that nearly 60% said they were going to start using it in the next 1 or 2 years. So it's a huge trend. And what's driving this is actually the success that these early adopters are having in terms of the time it takes to actually produce these predictions and the accuracy of these predictions. And so we see it's a huge trend. It's something that organizations got to look out for, which really brings me to my next technology trend, and that's in the area of driver-based budgeting. Now, most organizations we interview say they have driver-based budgeting models. In other words, what happens is we put a few numbers in, and from that information, it's able to generate a P&L, a cash flow, and a balance sheet, because they've actually set up rules that link, for example, sales with costs and so on. But in our experience, that isn't driver-based budgeting. That's just automating how a budget's generated. What we're finding is that organizations have started to use things like machine learning to work out what are the drivers of performance. And through what they learn from the algorithms, that then gets codified in the model. Now, the great thing about a driver-based model is that the focus is now on, have we got the right drivers? Are these really having an impact on performance? So a driver-based model is able to, for example, work out what a future P&L balance sheet might be, but also you can test and say, well, is that likely to happen? Is that real? And so what we find is that these models really help focus the organization as to what is driving value. They also develop some kind of ownership, because in the past, when members, let's say a sales team or a marketing team were just given a target, they'd go, well, how the heck am I supposed to achieve that? When you have a driver-based model, which actually puts the analytic foundation behind what those targets are, you get a sense of ownership. Because the ownership is now on, well, have we got the right drivers? Are we seeing this right? And it then forms the basis of scenario management that Larissa alluded to earlier on. Now, we're finding, if we have a look at the next slide, we're finding that there's actually 5 levels of maturity when it comes to driver-based planning. And again, we don't have time to go into these in this webinar, but we have some white papers that you can get a hold of. But on the left-hand side is where most people are. In other words, they have a driver-based model which is based on relationships, which they've uncovered, and it's a simple model. But as you go to the right, we're finding organizations are gradually using more and more transactional data, more and more detailed data, both internal and external to the organization. And they're using machine learning techniques, which then starts to drive the model. So to the right-hand side of this, we have a completely automated system. We have a few people that we've interviewed who've got totally automated systems. It's really interesting seeing how they're going on. If we then look at the last trend that we see, it's actually in something which are to do with the new integrated analytic platforms. If you look at what kind of systems you have inside your organization today, you'll see that there's probably a whole series of systems. So there might be a business intelligence system, there might be a budgeting system, there might be a reporting system, and all these systems are connected together somehow. And the problem is that they all use different, if you like, models, and they've got different structures, data is duplicated, and it's something that Victor Barnes, who's the global CFO of McDonald's, he categorized this as the messy middle. We have all these systems that are connected together. But what we're seeing is that there's a real adoption now on these new analytic platforms. And in the next slide, the way I like to describe what these analytic platforms are and how they're different is that they're really the Lego of the analytic world. In other words, they're a platform that has all the building blocks necessary to build completely integrated planning models. So for example, you could build an operational planning model, which is connected to a forecasting model, which is connected to the financial planning and budgeting model, which is connected to the strategic model. And so for the first time, you can actually have this completely integrated suite of models that are acting as though they were one model. And we're finding organizations who've adopted this are seeing tremendous improvements in the time that they're able to spend, for example, on the high value activities of working out, well, what things should we be doing? And so again, we see this as a big movement and a big trend, and we believe that certainly over the next few years, we're going to see more and more of this as people get rid of this messy middle and start to focus on FP&A. In other words, having all these models connected so they operate as one. Which really brings me to my summary, and the summary is this. Though I've outlined these technology trends, I want to say that technology is only an enabler. You can have the best technology in the world, but unless it's actually supporting the right processes, unless you've got the right skilled people to make sure you're planning the right things, it's just a waste of time. Because what's the point of having a bad and broken planning process that's just operated on quickly now? That doesn't make sense. So technology trends, they're great, but they're not the whole answer. Instead, it requires people to look at their organizational processes as well as the skills required, and that's be something that'll be in the next presentation. But that really ends my presentation. But let's see what's going on inside your world.